this video lesson, we're going to learn how to begin a research paper or research project. Because most of my emphasis is in the academic realm, a lot of the language I use and the examples I use will have to do with a research paper for a school, whether high school, college, graduate school. But it pertains to other types of research as well. So let's commence with the topic, how to begin a research paper. So one thing that you don't do is you don't start with a thesis. Now, I know a lot of us, as we're coming up, teachers always say, you have to start with the thesis. You start with the thesis. A thesis is the conclusion, the thing that you're going to prove in the course of the paper. Why don't you start with that? Well, there's a couple of reasons. First, why do teachers tell you to do that? Why do teachers in your high school English classes, for instance, tell you to start with the thesis? Because I think, having come up through English literature, and having written a lot of Englishy papers, I think it's because when we're writing a paper about our conclusions about a story or a poem or a play that we've read, we've already done the research. We already know what it is that we think about it. So now we're putting together our thoughts in a paper, and so we organize it around a thesis. But that's not how you start a research project, because you haven't read the novel yet, so to speak. You haven't done the research. So you don't start with the thesis. You see, so for instance, thesis might be the world is flat. That's what you want to start with. That's what you want to prove. Then, if that's your thesis, what you do is you go out and find the evidence to prove that the world is flat. And you ignore the evidence that disproves this. Now, except for maybe 5 or 10% of you out there, I think you understand that the world is not flat. The world is not a saucer. It's not a plate. It's not a frisbee. The world is roughly spherical. And if you set out to prove that the world is flat, and that's your thesis, right, you're going to end up being wrong, very wrong. Or you can have a thesis that the moon is made out of Swiss cheese. And so you go out and you find evidence to prove that the moon is made out of cheese. Well, that's wrong. But that's where you started. And then you back yourself into a corner trying to prove a thesis that 1 is not provable and 2 is false. So you don't start with the thesis. And if you don't start with the thesis, what do you start with? Okay, because deciding on your thesis or your conclusion first leads to what we call confirmation bias or cherry picking, which means that you select your evidence to prove your point. And this is dishonest and misleading. So in real life, we don't start with the thesis first. We start at the beginning, not at the finish, because the thesis is the conclusion. That's the thing that you're going to be proving, that your research proves. But you don't start there because you don't know what the research proves, because you haven't done the research. So for instance, if I want to buy a vehicle, and without asking any kind of question as to what kind of vehicle I want, what kind of vehicle I need, what my job is, if I'm going to have to use the vehicle for a job, if I've got 12 kids to ferry to the soccer field, I just decide to go out and buy a motorcycle because that's cool, right? Because I just decided that's my thesis. Well, you see from the picture, that might be inappropriate. Or if I want a dog, I decide first, before I do any kind of research as to what kind of dog might be suitable for my living arrangements and for my personal needs, I decide I want Clifford, the big red dog. Well, Clifford, the big red dog, doesn't fit into my apartment. But I didn't consider that because I didn't do any research. I started with the thesis first. Or, for instance, it could be job-related. Your boss tells you to research a location for the next store the company wants to build. And you decide on the thesis without any research that this is a good place. You see, this place is a good place because, I don't know, the land's cheap. It's got clear skies or something like that for whatever crazy reason. You haven't done any research. You haven't looked into, well, what's the traffic? How many people might come by? Are we going to have enough customers? Is there a need for our product out here in the middle of nowhere? You haven't done the research. So starting with the thesis first is a bad idea. So how do you start? So that's the question. That's what we're going to approach now. How do we start a research project? But before we go any further, I'll ask a couple things of you. One, the standard, click like below, subscribe if you want to learn more and more about writing. I'm putting more and more of these videos online. I've already got a bunch online about various types of writing, and I'm going to be putting even more. So, subscribe. And as well, I'm going to have a promotional offer for Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning environment. They have thousands of classes, and with my offer, you can get a free trial. So please click the offer, sign up, get a free trial to Skillshare, and learn. You can learn all sorts of things. You can learn academic stuff. They have academic topics. They also have fun topics, things that you've always wanted to learn. How to play the guitar, how to do basket weaving, how to macrame, how to plant petunias, whatever you want to do. You can learn it on Skillshare. So click the link below. I have the link below in the description and a little video about Skillshare, more information about Skillshare.
Skillshare is for designers, photographers, marketers, artists, and lifelong learners. Skillshare is for foodies, commuters, risk takers, the young, and the young at heart. It's for strategists, free spirits, purists, the bold, the curious, the characters, the makers, and the breakers. Skillshare is for everyone, an online learning community with thousands of classes to advance your career, improve the world, and pursue the work you love. What will you learn next? It all starts on Skillshare.
But now we'll continue with how do you start a research project? Okay? Well, first, I always suggest a topic that you're interested in or care about. So here we see the carometer, from I don't give a flying patootie about it to I'm passionate about this. I think, in my experience, it's always best to work from a topic that you really care about, because sometimes research can get a little dry. And if you don't care about the topic, that's going to impede your ability to turn out a good research paper in the end, because that's what you're doing. You're writing a research paper. So, and as well, you have a feel for the topic. And so you have a personal investment in it, but also you have a feel for it. And so this is very important, I think. Now, of course, it has to be within the parameters of the class you're taking, or the instructions of the person who's telling you to do it. Your boss tells you to research the best location for the new store. You can't go out and research what kind of dog makes the best pet. You see, so you have to stay within the parameters that are given you. But within those, you can choose a topic that is most to your liking. Next, your topic should not cover the entire world, so to speak, or world. So a broad topic is impossible to research. So for instance, once had a student come to me and say he wanted to research war. I go, well, that's kind of a broad topic. Where do you begin? I mean, what war are you talking about? Any particular war? War in general? War runs the entire history of humankind, several thousand years ago to right now. You have to narrow it because you're talking about a limited paper, maybe 3 pages, maybe 5 pages, maybe 10 pages, even 20 pages. Even whole books cannot cover all the wars in human history, so you have to narrow it. So he thought about it for a while, and then he finally decided on a pretty narrow topic. What are the stated reasons why the United States invaded Iraq in 2003? Good. So that's very narrow. He can build his paper from that. The stated reasons, the rationale for the U.S. invasion of Iraq in 2003. So, and right here I have another example. You could decide that you want to write on business management. Well, that's pretty broad. So maybe Japanese management style. And even that might be too broad. You might want to narrow that. Or you want to do something about music. Well, what kind of music? Music's very broad. History of country western music, music of ancient Egypt, evolution of hip-hop, the influence of jazz on the development of rock and roll. So you want to narrow your topic. Or one that I have here, a very narrow topic. What is the impact of music listening on students' achievement, students' grades? Does listening to music help students get better grades? That's a narrow topic. You see what I'm talking about? So you come from a very broad topic like music down to what do we know about the impact of music, of listening to music on students' grades, okay? Now, you want to develop a research question. So what is a research question? A research question helps you focus your research, and it provides. So what is a research question? A research question helps you focus your research, because what you're going to be doing when you do your research is you're going to be scanning the material and finding an answer to your research question. So you might encounter all sorts of interesting stuff. All sorts of interesting stuff about music. Did you know that the ancient Egyptians? No. Does this answer my question? Does this answer the question of how does listening to music help students in present-day United States, for instance, get better grades? Or does it? So if it answers the question, then you put it into your notes and then eventually maybe into your paper. If it doesn't answer the question, you skip right by it. You see, so the research question helps you focus your hunt for pertinent information that belongs in your paper. And then, as I said, you make a question out of it. So you start with your topic. Your topic is music and learning. And then you stick what's called an interrogative pronoun. What, how, why, when. And you put a question mark on the end. So you actually make a question. So this is where we get to grammar. Okay? Is this sentence a question? If it is, then it might be suitable for a research question. You see, because at the end of it, you're going to have an answer. At the end of the whole process, you're going to have an answer to your process. So, for instance, possible questions to this whole thing about music. What is the effect on grades of listening to music while studying? Does music help students concentrate while studying? Does putting information into musical form help students learn information? So students, in other words, if students sing the information. Okay. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. Does that help? Is classical music more effective than, say, listening to rock and roll or hip-hop or country music? And does music help reduce stress? And this might be especially pertinent to students who encounter stress in a learning environment. They're stressing about grades, about how well they're going to do on their test, or whether this paper is going to be acceptable to the professor, to the mean old Professor McIntyre. Does listening to music help relieve that stress? And so you have possible questions, you see, and then note how each question will lead you into a slightly different direction. And that's important. Each question will develop into a different paper. Now, we have to choose a question that is neither too broad nor too narrow. In other words, it's not too fat, not too thin. So how do I know if the question is too narrow, too skinny? It can be answered in one word or one number. When did Thomas Jefferson write the Declaration of Independence? 1776. That's one word. You have a one-word paper or one-number paper. What was the population of Switzerland in 2019? That's, again, it's a single number. What is the rate of juvenile delinquency in the U.S.? So number of arrests, maybe one sentence. So you don't want too skinny a question, too narrow a question that leads you to skinny a paper. Because remember, the question has to be developed into a answer, a paper that is acceptable to the person who's requiring you to do this, to your instructor, to your professor, to your teacher. So, and how do I know if it's too fat, too broad? Okay. What can we do to reduce juvenile delinquency in the U.S.? So this is a book, maybe. Maybe it's several books. In fact, there's whole libraries devoted to juvenile delinquency, crime committed by young people, by people who aren't yet adults. So that's too broad. Again, you have to narrow that. You have to narrow that question. Okay? And remember that even a question that is close to being correct might have problems. So, does education play a role in reducing juvenile delinquents' return to crime? It's called recidivism. So after a juvenile delinquent, after a young person is arrested for a crime, if they get education, if they're diverted into an educational program, does that help them not be criminal again, not commit crimes again? Well, you notice how it's phrased. Does it help? Yeah, it does. End of paper. That's it. That's your answer. Or, what are the benefits of education in reducing juveniles, delinquents' return to crime? Again, you see how the benefits is used? The word benefits presupposes, prejudices you into only looking at the benefits. Like, they're only benefits. Now, I believe in education. I believe everybody benefits from education. So I would subscribe to this, but I would still say, or your question should be more open-ended. So it allows for both, in this case, negatives and positives. So you don't want to presuppose even the direction of your answer. You want your question to be in the Goldilocks zone. So remember the fairy tale, Goldilocks and Three Bears? And she was looking at the bed that she'd sleep in, and she said, oh, this one's too big, oh, this one's too small, and this one is just right. Well, that's where you want your question to be. You want it to be just right. So, for instance, and one of the topics that we're looking at, juvenile delinquency and education, perhaps, what effect does education have on juvenile delinquents' return to crime? So that seems to be a tight research question. That's in the Goldilocks zone. And you don't want to waste your time. Can the topic be researched? You can ask this question. Can I research this question? So, for example, do the economies from a recycling plant outweigh or not outweigh its environmental impact? This is researchable. You'll have to sort through a lot of information, a lot of data, but you can find solid data on this. You can research this. Or, what is the meaning of life? Ultimately, this is not researchable. You tell me. So not only are there different philosophies, different religions answer this question differently, but even different individuals within those philosophies and within those religions. You'll find Christians disagreeing with other Christians. You'll find Hindus disagreeing with other Hindus, Muslims with other Muslims, and so on and so on. And if you even go outside of religion, you'll find philosophers within, a non-religious tradition disagreeing with each other. So this is not researchable. The only thing that you really could research is what do people within this particular school, this particular religion, think the meaning of life is. That you could possibly research. Who makes the better burger? Well, the age-old question, perhaps more important than the meaning of life, but again, not really researchable, or only researchable if you define certain terms. What do you mean better? What do you mean by the word better? Better is so vague. Do you mean better nutrition? Better tasting? Do you mean better value? And then what is value? Fewer calories? More calories? Better for making your kids happy? Stuff it in their face. Shut up. Even then, the answer is subjective in so many ways. The only thing that you could do with this question, perhaps, is do a survey and get people's responses to their perceptions of quality, taste, its value, etc. So you could do that type of research, but you couldn't really research, ultimately, the question of a better burger. And as I said, there are non-researchable questions. Moral questions: is abortion right? Well, you tell me. I mean, we have arguments back and forth. We could do a poll. We could research what people believe about abortion, but ultimately, this has to do with different value systems. And people start off in different camps as they approach the question. What about poverty? That's kind of general, isn't it? Well, what about poverty? I don't know. What question are you asking about it? And something is not a question. Drugs and education. You have two words, but there's no question. You see, there's no question relating them. It's not a sentence. It has to be a sentence. Remember, you have to start with an interrogative pronoun, what, and end with a question mark. So you have to have a question. You have to have a sentence that forms a question. Or too vague. Does corruption affect efficiency? I don't know, because the question is so vague. Maybe, maybe not. Maybe it affects it in a positive way. So I don't know. It's very vague. So there's non-researchable questions. You have to be careful of these. Okay? Now, it is possible sometimes to reframe non-researchable questions into researchable ones. So, should I put my youngster in preschool? I don't know. But do children enrolled in preschool develop better social skills than children who aren't enrolled in preschool? You see, that's researchable. Then you can look at what the data says. You can see what the research says. What is the best way to learn how to read? I don't know. But what's a good age or the best age to teach children phonics? You can research that. What does the research say? Are some people born bad? Well, that's not researchable. But who commits more crimes? Rich people or poor people? Males or females? What countries have the highest crime rates? What is thought to lead to crime in certain countries or certain areas? So what types of crimes are more likely to be committed in, say, different countries, different states, different communities? You see, so you can reframe a non-researchable question into a researchable question. So always keep in mind, so if you really like a topic but you find it's not researchable, you can reframe it. You can frame it into a researchable research question. So here we get to the part of the video in which I summarize. I don't always summarize, but in this case I think it's useful. So remember, we talked about, does the question deal with a topic or issue that interests you? Remember, this is going to be something that you're working on for some time. This is not a project or a paper that you're going to be able to throw together the morning of or the night before, even if you stay up all night. There's a lot of reading to do, a lot of delving into source material. So it has to interest you to keep you involved. And is the question too broad, too narrow, or just right? Remember the Goldilocks zone? So it has to be just right. Not too big, not too small, but just right. And is it fully researchable? So I sometimes have students come to me and they want to research what's going to happen in the next 10 years. Well, that's not really researchable, is it? Nobody's written a history of the future yet. So it's not researchable. So you have to make sure that your topic, your issue, your question is researchable. And what type of information will I need? Statistics, history, case studies, current research, journals, books, internet, government resources, people. So all these are found in different areas, and you have to consider whether these are accessible as well. Can I access these sources? So what will I need, and can I get to them? If I need classified government data, classified papers, I want to research something on UFOs. Well, all that information is classified. You can't get at it. And if you do, they'll shoot you. Just joking about that. But anyway, but you get my point, right? You can't access some sources. So you have to consider, what types of information will I need? What type of information will I need? And can I access it? And is it reasonable that I can read all this material, put all this material together in the time that I have to write the paper? The instructor gives me a deadline. The end of the term is 1 month away. My boss says, have this to me in 2 weeks. Do I have a project that is doable? Is it possible? And then finally, after you answer all these questions, you can ask yourself and answer, do I have a quality research topic and research question that will turn into a viable quality product? And if you do, then you can begin your research. And remember, what your research does, it addresses and answers your research question. Because in the end, your research paper will answer the research question. So at the end of your paper, both you and your reader will be able to say, now I know.